Good afternoon. I'm really pleased to welcome you to CBI's Monday SME policy briefing. For those of you I've yet to meet, and as I say each week, I very much hope to do so one day soon. My name is Deborah Fraser and I'm Director for Regions here at the CBI. Now today we have a slightly different format again, despite not having had a week off. We have format today, we have with us Paul Scully, who is the Minister for SMEs at BEIS. The format we'll be going through is I'll be putting a series of questions to Paul on topics we know that are most important to you, so topics you've told us about. I will then hand over to Fiona Geskas, who I know a lot of you are already familiar with. Fiona is my colleague in Tax and Fiscal, and Fiona will be looking at the chat box and taking questions that you're sending in and posing them to Paul. So please do go to your little chat box, and if you've got questions that you want to send to Paul, please do send them and we will ask as many as possible. If they're really specific and technical, we might have to refer them on because Paul has got a really good breadth of knowledge for his subject areas. We've been quite impressed to date, and I'm sure he won't let us down today, but there might be a few questions that perhaps are a little bit technical for him. So Paul, thank you so much for joining us. Before we open things up to people on who are sort of watching us at home or in offices or in places around the country, what we do is keen to talk to you about 4 particular topic areas. They are access to finance, the job retention scheme, rents, and then thinking about restart, so thinking about the economy and really where we're going next. So in terms of access to finance, perhaps we can start there, because I would say that's probably, and Fiona knows this because she's our tax and fiscal person, it's probably one of our most sort of keenly debated and subject areas of interest. Now, I think it's fair to say we have seen unprecedented support and action from government so far. You know, we've seen the job retention scheme, we've seen loans, we've seen VAT referrals, we've seen business rates. However, I think there's still more that can be done to protect jobs and livelihoods. And, you know, just, gosh, what was it, about 20 minutes ago, the Chancellor came on, and we're really pleased to see, you know, an intervention providing government guarantees for loans under £25,000. We're also really pleased to see some information on simplifying the process. But perhaps you could maybe talk to people who are on the call today about, you know, what further interventions government's looking at, and perhaps going into a little bit more detail on the announcements by the Chancellor, you know, in the last hour.
Yeah, no, thank you, Deborah, and thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to come and speak to you. The CBI does some really good work, and part of my job over the last few weeks, crikey, I've been a minister, feels like 5 minutes and a lifetime in one session as a relative new boy, with a baptism of fire. But part of that, the role within all of this extraordinary situation, has to be engaged with a number of different sectors, a number of different groups, and the CBI has been there right at the heart of that. So on a weekly and sometimes many times a week basis. The Chancellor was really adamant at the beginning of this situation that we can't let our economy suffer any more than we know is happening at the moment. So we're there to make sure that we can help any company. And you've outlined a number of the schemes that we've got to support business and to make sure that not only can we get through these times, but we can start to look at bouncing back and recovering, and we're in a position to recover at the end of it. And when we first launched the loan scheme in particular, it was clear that although it was unprecedented and groundbreaking and one of the more generous schemes around the world and responsive schemes around the world, there were still too many companies falling in between the cracks. And that's why we introduced the CL Bills scheme, to make sure that we could get the larger companies that couldn't access the CCFF scheme, that was really very large schemes, loans. We managed to get those sort of companies involved. The banks weren't still able to get enough money out quickly enough to the smaller companies and the small end of the lending schemes. And so that's why the Chancellor, as I was on my last call, so I've only just caught up with him myself, has now launched the Bounce Back loan scheme. So that allows a maximum of £50,000 or 25% of turnover, which the government will pay the interest for the first 12 months. and it's 100% backed by the government, which hopefully will start getting money out of the door into businesses' hands so that they can get through their cash flow issues as quickly and tackle them as quickly as possible, because there should be a very short form. There's no forward-looking viability. It's purely and simply a loan if you are affected by COVID in the here and now. Simple form, and for most companies, the money should be going out within 24 hours of application.
Great. I mean, I think, I think a lot of people would be delighted to hear about that 100% guarantee from the government, and the process simplifying a bit. I think it's fair to say within the SME community, there's a lot of people that haven't previously had to access finance, perhaps don't have that type of relationship with the banks. The banks don't have relationships with them. Is there anything more that the government's looking at in terms of simplifying that process, or perhaps for an SME where cash flow? I mean, we know at the moment cash is absolutely king, but where cash flow is proving particularly difficult, where we could look at longer term paybacks. So I suppose my questions to you are, can the process be simplified further? And is longer term payback from that 12 months something that's on your agenda?
Well, I think in terms of more to do, so we've adapted it for the smaller companies, smaller loans, and these kind of things. We will always look at what more we can do, and to make sure that there's enough flexibility in the system to be able to bounce back. But it is difficult, because we've got to make sure that, first of all, yes, you're going to want to make sure that you can pay back your loan. But we've also got the grant schemes, we've got the job retention scheme for small businesses where self-employed people are working within them. There's a self-employed scheme. So there is money going out without payback, as well as loans. But we'll continue to look. We'll continue to make sure that that we can support businesses as best we can over the medium and long term as well. But we must make sure that we can do it in an affordable way that's not going to that we can address over the next decade or so, because we saw what happened in 2008. We've got to make sure that the scheme, which is massive, as you outlined at the beginning, is still proportionate enough so that we can get on with funding our public services in the years to come.
Yeah, and I think we're all focused on protecting jobs, because actually if unemployment is more costly than than keeping people in jobs. Perhaps if I could just pick up on your point regarding grants, and you're right, we've seen some work around grants and relief for specific sectors, but where that doesn't do is it doesn't look at the supply chains within those sectors, or is that something that the government is looking at? And something the CBI has been calling for is potentially a 3-month business rates holiday for everyone. Again, is that something that's being considered? Is that something that we can potentially hear noise on in the future?
So, are we considering things about supply chains? As part of the engagement I've been doing, I'll just give you an example. For example, so on Tuesdays, I tend to deal with a number of businesses or organisations that represent SMEs. On Wednesday, I'm speaking to unions. Thursday, it's non-food retail. Friday, it's the hospitality sector. So those businesses and those sectors that are getting those grants in particular, obviously they are raising the issue of their supply chains all the time, and so we are discussing it. We try to work out between BEIS, Treasury, MHCLG, the various government departments that are involved in financing business rates and business and access to finance. So we'll continue to keep all of those options open, not just for now, but also we do need to work out, whereas we can't say when there is going to be a date that we're going to start lifting restrictions. What we can do is keeping an eye out on what we might do, what the new normal is going to be like. Now, that's going to be, say, social distancing within retail, within businesses, offices, working outside, those kind of things. But it's also going to be that economy that starts to increase its pace, not in a light switch moment, but gradually. So we need to make sure, as I say, that we keep the flexibility with all of the schemes so that we can continue to address the changing world.
Great. Okay. So perhaps moving on from access to finance, and I know there's questions coming in, because I can see those questions coming in, and Fiona's allocating some to herself, and I think some that she's going to be asking Paul as well. So if we move on to job retention scheme, which is perhaps our second most favourite topic on our Monday webinar. In terms of SMEs, a lot of SMEs have smaller workforces, or they have very highly skilled workforces. Therefore, the opportunity to furlough staff can be less I don't want to say less easy, but it can be more tricky than perhaps for some of the larger firms who perhaps have opportunity to move, or you've got more than one specialist, for example. Are the changes that government are looking at for the JRS scheme specifically for SMEs, and particularly I'm thinking about part time?
So you've seen the flexibility that we've had in the scheme already. So we extended it a month. We've also changed the cut-off date from the 28th of February to the 19th of March in response to real life examples. And similarly, I was talking about the return to some sense of normality, or the new normal, as I described it earlier on. And so the ideas that you've been talking about have been raised by a number of businesses and organisations like the CBI themselves. So we need to, as I say, we'll continue that discussion on. But part of the flexibility of the job retention scheme is the 3 week on, the 3 week off. So you can furlough a member of staff for 3 weeks if there's not enough work for them to be doing, and then bring them back if at some point in the future you feel that it's best suited to have them on board. It's not an income replacement scheme, it's a compensation scheme. It's, as you said, Deborah, it's a way of trying to protect as many jobs and businesses as we can. And so these are people that chances are otherwise would have had to be laid off permanently. We've just found a way of being able to lay off temporarily. But there is still flex, and let's see where the conversations go in the future.
And I think that's an important point to make is, the JRS scheme was set up for companies in distress. It's not a cost saving activity, and if every business that could furlough because actually it's a cost saving, if we used it in that way, not in the spirit that it was actually set up, we would, let's be honest, run out of cash pretty quickly. In terms of, and you touched on it in terms of the extension to the JRS, and that being sort of further extended, which I have to say was most welcome when we were looking at that sort of Friday cliff edge. Is there anything that in terms of sort of the phasing out of the JRS scheme, is that being thought about in terms of rather than it being an abrupt end, potential, percentage of, at the moment it's 80%, is different percentages, is there, looking at it being sort of more flexible and sort of over a larger time span? What's the sort of thinking? What's your sort of thinking there?
Well, I can't tell you particularly about our thinking because it's being discussed constantly. But what I can tell you is exactly the sort of suggestions that you talked about are things that you, as the CBI, have suggested to us, and a number of organisations have suggested to us. So we'll keep that on board. I mean, you talk about tapering off. That does fit with the, I'm not talking about the job retention scheme specifically, but any tapering off assistant fits in with the ramping up of the economy, because clearly, as I say, there's not going to be a light switch moment when suddenly we think, okay, fine, all of this is over, we go back to normal. That's just not going to happen. We can see in all of the media, all of the scientific research, all of the comments coming from other parts of the government, based on the science, with how this is spread and the experience of other countries, we're going to be able to, we're looking at not just sector by sector, but workplace by workplace, the kind of different regulations, restrictions, and the speed of lifting those restrictions in each type of workplace. And so we'll keep the economic and the financial support a close eye on that, and trying to make it as adaptable as possible.
And I think, when we talk about that restart, and it's something we'll come on to in a little bit, is, I think at the front and centre of everybody's minds is, health first. I think that's whether it's government, whether it's unions, whether it's the CBI, whether it's other business organisations, that health first point is absolute. Just one question further on the JRS before we perhaps move on to rent. In terms of, and this particularly applies to smaller businesses, especially startups, so the support amendment doesn't extend. Well, is the plans? Let's put it a different way. Is the plans to extend the support for JRS to those whose income mainly comes from dividends rather than from PAYE? And I ask that because I think, especially for the micro companies and startups, it's often a way to engage particularly highly skilled teams or highly skilled staff, or actually just actually the model that you're having to use when you're a genuine entrepreneur getting your business off the ground.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I mean, from a pure sense of approach, the dividends are investment income. It's not a salary per se. But as you say, for many people, including myself, when I was running an SME, when I first started one, many people pay themselves part income salary and part dividends. It helps with flexibility. It helps with cash flow. And reduction of bureaucracy as well. That was certainly the reason that I did it. So I have a lot of empathy with people that are finding themselves in falling between the cracks, and as you mentioned right at the beginning. So it's not a dogmatic thing, but there is a complexity within any of these systems and how to deliver. The grant scheme that we've talked about should be, in theory, really easy. We've got a £10,000 grant, we've got a £25,000 grant. The local authority writes the check, given them from the money that the government has given it to, hands it to a business. But actually what they've had to do, they've had to reverse engineer their business rate payment scheme. They don't even know some of the details, the bank details of where to pay it, where a company actually is paying business rates in, not and not taking money out. So they just don't know the bank account. So there's been a lot of weeks' work done to just deliver that seemingly simple system. The JRS scheme, the loan schemes have had to change because of the complexity of it. This one in particular, when you are filling in a tax return, the tax return does not differentiate between investment income and where those dividends are coming from. Was it purely investment income from shares that you might own as part of an investment, or was it from your business? So what I've done when people have asked me this question, I've asked, give me a complete solution. Give me something that actually would work not only in, we know what the problem is, but something that is relatively easily deliverable without too much intense need for resource, which is scarce at the moment because everyone's working so hard to deliver this sort of stuff so that we can give people the relief that they're after. So that's what I've asked for everybody. If you can supply that, I'll be very interested. And then we can have the conversations between us, Treasury, and all of the decision makers and see where we get to.
Yeah. So we maybe if people listening to sort of play out, if you have got examples and case studies that we can use, it really helps our conversation with the government and helps their thinking as well. And Paul, to be fair, I mean, when the JRS, portal opened, last week, I think, hats off to those who are sitting behind it, because as we said, if something's not working, trust us, our phones go crazy, our emails go crazy, and it was relatively quiet. So do pass on our thanks to the teams behind that.
No, we'll do. And I should say, actually, we've already had some messages coming in from people who are receiving them, or already received the money as well. So that's a positive early start as well. So.
Great. So very quickly on to Rent, because I'm conscious that questions are coming in. So we'll do a quick couple more questions from me on some of the subjects we've talked about before and have come in, and then I'll hand over to Fiona. So Rent, very quickly, I think in terms of the prevention, in terms of wind-up measures for companies affected by coronavirus, great news. So really pleased to see that, something that we've been calling for. I suppose one further question in terms of additional support for landlords and tenants facing challenges around paying commercial rent. Is that on your radar? Where is government thinking on that?
Well, look, you're right. I think we were really early on. We gave a 3-month moratorium on people paying rent, that we wouldn't allow people to seek evictions in that time. That was one particular short-term measure because clearly the rent is still payable. But what we found then that there's some landlords were starting to use a bit more of an extreme way of guarantee their rents through statutory notices and wind-up petitions, and so that's something that we're looking at now. We've been really clear on where we're going with that. In terms of rent going forward, again, this is representation that we've had from the CBI and other organisations in terms of the longer support, the longer term support, the medium term support, because cash flow pressures are going to remain. Again, it's something that we are talking to colleagues about. We're talking amongst departments. So I don't have a load of answers for you at this stage with these sort of things, because, as you say, it is incredibly complex. And the situation is fast moving, but we are sympathetic and keeping everything open. There's nothing that we're closing off at this moment in time.
Okay, so just one further question from myself before I hand over to Fiona. So what plans are you, I mean, in terms of restart, which, sort of we're hearing quite a lot in the press around, sort of reduction in sort of lockdown and how that's being considered. What plans have you got for involving the SME community in the sort of coming out of lockdown? How are you planning on engaging SMEs in this process? And and is there a role, and this is probably a sub question, is there a role for LEPs and mayors to be thinking about this on a geographical basis as well?
Yeah, definitely. So we've already, already been involving SMEs. Clearly, first of all, you said it yourself that everything in terms of the date that we start to open up and exactly how we open up is going to be based on health. We're here, the government's priority first and foremost is to save lives, but livelihoods is right up there, the economy is right up there. So making sure that businesses and the economy can come out of that is really, really crucial. And so what I've asked now for about 2 weeks at least is, without talking about the dates because that's based on health, and so the real specifics, the idea, but the modelling and how each business, each workplace is going to be able to start to continue to trade with the social distancing that's likely to continue for some time to come. What is your thinking? And I've already asked for that feedback. So again, if you can channel your members thinking they're modelling for this and supply that to us, what that will do, that will help shape our thinking. That will also help give the guidance that's tailored to your specifics. And so what I've asked for, what I've been asked most by businesses is, please give us plenty of warning and please no surprises. Well, if you've been there and helped us shape our guidance, then there shouldn't be the surprises because it's been helped by your thinking and your approach. But also we can, just having the conversation with you, you'll know where we're going and roughly when. So I want to give you as much certainty as you can because business relies and thrives on certainty. So I'm already starting to that level of engagement. We've already got the CBI involved as well in that bit of work about the sort of like, all looking at the range of different workplaces and types of business. So please do feed in through the CBI, however, whatever channel you have into government, and we're very much here to listen.
Great, thank you. And there are a few hundred on this call, so the message is going out to you. Please, in terms of restart and how we do that, bear in mind that health first perspective. Do start to talk to us. Those frameworks. Sorry, Paul.
Well, no, I should have said actually, Deborah, sorry to cut you off, but actually you asked about LEPs and mayors as well, and absolutely no, because I talked about sectors and workplaces, but regional is really important because what we do need is as consistent approach as we can across the country. That's the devolved nations, the cities. What we don't want is mixed messages and people who have one branch in one place and one branch in another place, struggling to find a consistent approach to being able to reopen their business if they've got one in Manchester, one in London, and maybe one in Scotland, for example. We don't want 3 different approaches if we can help it.
Yeah, that's single economy UK. Right, I'm conscious of time, so I know we have to wrap this up at 5 to Paul, because you've got another call. So that gives us probably just over sort of 10 minutes, Fiona. So perhaps I can hand over to you for some questions coming in from the audience.
Yes, definitely. And we've had lots and lots of questions, so thank you so much for submitting. I've tried to, while you've been speaking, to group them a bit to make sure I'm not asking the same question several times. But I probably start with one that's an interesting one, and I wanted to flag also that we have a webinar session coming up on this on the 18th of May, which is around cybersecurity. So given sort of the widespread working from home, has the government considered the cybersecurity impact, particularly on small businesses of the COVID outbreak? That's kind of the first question. I think that'll probably be on lots of people's minds.
Yeah, in terms of the cyber stuff, I think there'll be a lot of advice out there, which we've got to make sure, first of all, again, is consistent. Because what this has done, this entire crisis, is it's brought a lot of things to the fore a lot quicker than they might as well have happened. So if you look at the negative, the debate around high streets and shops on the high street versus online, it's accelerated that process, that discussion. But on the positives, what it's done is it's accelerated probably the take up of flexible working. and made that debate that we were likely to have in the months and years to come anyway, really acute, because we're all sitting here in the new normal, working from home, but also digital take-up, which is actually contributing to that side of things. So yeah, we're having the discussion in Parliament, whereas the House of Commons has been using Zoom, House of Lords is using Microsoft Teams. So and there's obviously been cybersecurity discussions around that. We are looking at it, and again, we're always looking to how to feed in and offer you the best advice possible.
Perfect, thank you. That sounds very interesting. It's another sort of bunch of questions around the access to finance piece, understandably, given the recent or the very fresh announcements from the Chancellor. One question is, is the government considering a central sort of policy guidance around what happens if your claim is rejected, or your application for a CBIL is rejected? Is there a centralised appeals process the government is thinking about if a healthy and profitable business is turned down by the bank? That's sort of certainly a question that we're getting at the moment, and I've heard that on other forums too.
Yeah, no, there's not. What we've done, the loan schemes have all been administered via the British Business Bank, the government sponsored bank, but they're actually operated by the commercial lenders, which are accredited, and so they should have relatively narrow parameters. Such that you shouldn't be falling between the cracks. However, there are a number of different types of lenders within that. So you've got your big high street banks, but you've also got some peer-to-peer lenders and these kind of things. So you can actually have different type of risk appetites and different approaches to different types of businesses. So hopefully there will be one that suits your business. But UK Finance, we have regular conversations with them, who work with have that membership association with all of the banks and all the lenders. So I would say go through, if it's not the CBI, go through your LAPs, the growth hubs, or even in your individual MPs as well, because we do get a number of, we can't go through every rejected loan clearly, but if there's something that's really apparent to you, then MPs have been raising issues where there's an obvious injustice there, and we'll look at it.
Perfect. And then the other thing, more sort of to flag it, and I'm just giving you sort of a chance to respond, which is around, a particular issue for SMEs and smaller businesses in normal times, quote unquote, is the issue of late payments, and that, given the current economic situation, is, I think, increasingly an issue that they're bringing to us, and something that comes up quite a bit. What's the government thinking at the moment around that, and is the approach kind of changing a little?
Again, it's something that's being accelerated, Fiona. So we'd already talked about late payments in our manifesto, in extending the powers of the Small Business Commissioner, Philip King, the current incumbent. He's doing a really good job during this crisis. So what he's doing is he's taken as many examples. He's really keen to hear from business about their examples, good and bad. And so it's up to us at this moment in time to be calling out the really bad examples. If you remember, the Chancellor said in one of his press conferences a few weeks back, not only look for government schemes, but what is it that you've done as a business when you're looking back in a few years' time to help people and society and communities and other businesses through this. So we've all got a role to play. So calling out that practice, but actually what he's been doing is phoning up some good practice as well, companies, and saying thank you, seeing what more he can share, take away from them, and share it with other people as well. So, but we will be giving him more powers, or that role more powers, to tackle late payments, because it is so difficult, as I know from firsthand when I was running a small business myself.
Yeah. And then, I mean, I think I'm going to try and do something and wrap a few kind of themes and questions into one, so that might be successful or not. But I think one of the questions is sort of, as we sort of look to the questions of opening up again and restarting the economy, or relaxing some of the public health guidance, which I appreciate is may still be a good few weeks away. The question is, if the approach is a sector by sector approach, what is the government's thinking around the winding down of some of these schemes? So on the job retention scheme, for example, this has come up a bit. if it's sector by sector opening up, the sectors that don't open up for a long time, and those could be sectors in specific industries. Would the JRS then continue for those sectors and close down for those that have opened up already? Similar questions. We've had a question from a vape manufacturer. Are there going to be specific sector specific approaches taken as we kind of open the economy up again?
Well, look, it's all going to be based on practicalities at the end of the day, because I know the vape sector, obviously, when we were closing down, businesses were keen to remain open. So what we want to do is to make sure that as many businesses that can practice social distancing can open, because it's really important that we keep the economy going, not only for jobs, but as I said before, for tax revenue to pay for public services. Frankly, all of these sort of things is sensible, but it's got to be based around that scientific evidence, as I say. So one obvious sector that has been badly affected and will continue to be affected significantly through social distancing is hospitality, because it's pretty difficult to run a restaurant, a pub, or something like that when you only have a third of the tables, or however many tables you can fit in a restaurant within 2 meters of each other. Whereas in shops, you tend to come in, buy something, and leave. Places where you congregate, you're at risk for that a little bit longer. So that's why I speak to sectors, different sectors. But as I say, it could just easily be as valid for workplaces or regions and these kind of things. So we will keep the support as fluid, as flexible as possible. We are coming up with our thinking at the moment based on conversations we are having at the moment with companies in all of those different groups that I was talking about.
Perfect, that sounds great. I think I'll probably leave it there because I'm conscious that some of the questions are quite sort of specific. Debs, I don't know if you had any other ones you wanted to ask, or if you've had a chance to look through.
There's a lot come through, and I mean, I suppose my notes is what we'll do is you're very popular, Paul. You've lots of questions for you. What we will do is I think we will take some of these and probably sort of slice and dice them across our policy floor and get some responses, because I think some of them actually we can probably respond ourselves, and then perhaps where we can't respond, Paul, and we're needing a government steer, we can come back to you. It might be nice to get you back here in a few weeks' time as well to talk about where we are in terms of next stage, because we'll be in gosh, it'll feel like another lifetime in 4 weeks, won't it? But I suppose, is there any final sort of thoughts for you that you'd like to share with everyone we've got registered for this call?
Yeah, in terms of the support, clearly you have the CBI here. That's why you're here, who are doing great work, and they can actually corral your messages and pass them over to me and other government ministers. But similarly, they can provide you with a resource and support that in terms of where you can get assistance from. You've got your growth hubs, your labs. There's organisations like Be the Business that can signpost you to some important places. You've got the gov.uk website as well. And what we've got now is a support finder. So if you Google Business Support Finder, there is a form that you can fill in on the government website, and it'll actually list the kind of things that you can have access to. So we're trying to consolidate all of that information and make it as easy for you to access as possible. It's not always easy, but we're trying to refine it and get it to you. But I would ask you, just carry on being positive. You are the small businesses on the call and will know, because you are inherently entrepreneurial, you're inherently positive. So please continue to do that. Please continue to stay safe. Encourage others to do it as well. But you are the backbone of the economic recovery that we're working towards when we get post this crisis. So I want to make everything, as I've said, I've used the word flexible so many times. I want to keep the scheme and the support flexible for you. So I am listening, government is listening. So please do keep feeding your thoughts in. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Thanks so much for your time. So just a few things from myself before we wrap things up. In terms of next session, we are back to our normal time of 3 o'clock. So do register. What we're looking at there is on reputational risk, because reputations is interesting. We had a comment that reputations aren't going to be made during this crisis. They're going to be revealed. So there is quite a conversation about thinking about your reputation, how you're contributing, how you're behaving during the COVID-19 situation. So that's on the 4th of May. 18th of May, as Fiona said, we're going to do cyber security, and I think we've got a speaker from GCHQ coming onto that call as well. So that should be a really interesting session. We will look to come back to you as much as possible on questions. We do that as we really try hard, and Diane is fantastic at doing that and trying to come back to you. So we will do that, or we might try and signpost you to different things. But I suppose just final from me, thank you very much. Thank you, Paul, so much. Fiona, lovely to see you as always, still missing you. Yeah, everybody please stay safe and stay home till we're not allowed to.